Mr. President, newspaper just about is your stance on Ukraine. I was looking up. I almost found no indications that you said anything bad about Zelensky up until the last few days. And it seems as though when he didn't take the mineral deal and was critical of you for having a delegation talk in Saudi Arabia with Russia, that was a turning point for you, correct?
I've been watching for years, and I've been watching him negotiate with no cards. He has no cards. And you get sick of it. You just get sick of it. And I've had it. And he then made a deal with us for rare earth and things. And who knows what rare earth is worth, but at least it's something. But look what you have. You have a man who's led a country that had the most beautiful cities that they demolished, had the most beautiful domes. Those domes are the most beautiful in the world.
But it's all Russia's. But that's Russia's fault, though, Mr. President. Russia
They're
did
all demolished, 1,000-year-old domes, and everything's demolished. I mean, it's like a demolition site, though. It's sort of like Gaza. In fact, it's more. At least Gaza has a couple of buildings standing. I mean, this place. You take a look at the demolition of so many of those cities, and and all those people are killed. Never to come back again.
But, Mr. President, that's all. That's Vladimir Putin's fault. Don't you agree?
I get tired of listening to it. I'll tell you what. I've seen it enough. And then he complains that he's not at a meeting that we're having with Saudi Arabia trying to intermediate a peace. Well, he's been at meetings for 3 years with with a president who didn't know what the hell he was doing. He's been in the meetings for 3 years, and nothing got done. So I don't think he's very important to be at meetings, to be honest with you. He's been there for 3 years. He makes it very hard to make deals. But look what's happened to his country. It's been demolished.
But no, I hear you.
He's going to go back.
But, Mr. President, but you know who's to blame for that.
If and when there's peace,
but don't you think it's Vladimir Putin that did the invasion unwarranted, to try to take back land he had no right to? And don't you think fundamentally that's that? And if you could just get now both sides want to talk, it seems. So we should just get to that point.
They only want to talk because of me. If I wasn't involved, they wouldn't be talking to each other. And Russia would continue to, go through Ukraine because they are going through, Brian. They've taken a lot of land. And Russia would continue the march through Ukraine. If it wasn't for me, they wouldn't be talking at all. I'm the only reason they're talking.
No. Well, they weren't talking because Vladimir Putin wouldn't talk to Zelensky, first of all. Secondly, it is interesting. Brian Kilmeade kept trying to say, well, if all the buildings are knocked down, Mr. President, they're all knocked down because of Vladimir Putin. I mean, that's the reason why they're destroyed. And so now, for some reason, the logic is that you actually punish a country for being invaded and having their buildings knocked down by a Russian invader. It's very interesting. Mark Halperin's newsletter this morning talks about how there are many Democrats and others who believe that things are turning just a bit. And he makes a long list talking about how maybe the reasons why Donald Trump's negatives keep going up. And a few things that he lists are and you can hear it right there. You can see it in the New York Post. You can see it in Wall Street Journal editorial page. Those are three Rupert Murdoch-run outlets. America and the world will not stand for Trump insulting Zelensky, writes the Wide World of News. Zelensky is proudly standing up to Trump. Trump kowtowing to Putin is unseemly, and also has consequences for the world, empowering the Russian dictator and emboldening Xi, among many other negative spin-off effects. And that is, I think, for Republicans that I speak to, Mika, off the record, their real concern, of course, they're horrified that it is Zelensky that's being called a dictator and Putin getting a free pass. But what they're really concerned about is the message that it's sending to the communist Chinese,
right?
Who, if Putin is given a free pass for invading Ukraine, then these Republicans and all Democrats, and they'll say it publicly, are afraid that Donald Trump is empowering the communist Chinese to invade Taiwan.
So it's not just President Trump taking the position you heard in that radio interview. Now, 3 Trump administration officials are dodging questions about whether Russia is responsible, a simple question, for starting the conflict in Ukraine. Here's what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff had to say yesterday.
I don't need to get into the characterization of, we know who invaded who. We understand the stakes of this game. America, more than any other country in the world, has invested in helping Ukraine defend itself. Now it's time for peace, and that's what the president is dedicated to. So standing here and saying, you're good, you're bad, you're a dictator, you're not a dictator, you invaded, you didn't, it's not useful. It's not productive. And so President Trump isn't getting drawn into that in unnecessary ways. And as a result, we're closer to peace today than ever before.
But fair to say, Russia attacked unprovoked into Ukraine 3 years ago tomorrow.
Fair to say it's a very complicated situation.
Can you acknowledge that Russia is the aggressor here?
Well, you know what? Who would you rather having go toe-to-toe with the likes of Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi, or anyone else? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? He's the deal maker in chief. He's the commander in chief, and it's only because of his strength that we're even in this position. And President Trump's own words have been that Russia invaded a neighbor under Bush, under Obama, and under Biden, but not him. It didn't happen his first term, and he's going to bring it to an end his second term.
The war, irrespective of who started it, needs to end. Too many people's lives have been expunged as a result of it, and it just doesn't make sense to the president. He wants to be the peacemaking president, peace through strength, and I don't blame him. I actually concur right down the line with his thought process around this. That's one. Two, that the war didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president has spoken about this. That didn't need to happen. It basically became a threat to the Russians. And so we have to deal with that fact. And those are real facts on the ground here.
I actually was going to say, Ed Lewis, that Steve Witkoff's first talking point was actually really what the line for everybody should have been, which is this is a president who is concerned about peace. But then we go on and unfortunately, the second part of it suggested that Vladimir Putin was provoked into invading Ukraine. I must say, not the most surprising, unfortunately. Let's just say the most curious from somebody that talks about a warrior spirit in the military. Hearing our Secretary of Defense saying, well, there are many complicated questions about who started the war 3 years ago. It is not complicated. It is not complicated who began the war with their invasion into Ukraine, trying to get to Kyiv within 3 days. It's not complicated if you read the Wall Street Journal editorial page. It's not complicated even if you read the New York Post. Vladimir Putin is the tyrant. Vladimir Putin is the dictator. Vladimir Putin is the invader, according to the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and most Republicans in the United States Senate and House.
Yes. I mean, this was sort of an Orwellian display of people saying night is day, black is white, auditioning to be the Baghdad Bob of the situation. It's quite humiliating for them because they know better. Well, at least Mike Waltz knows better. I don't know much about Steve Witkoff's political views, but I know that Mike Waltz has a very clear, as does Marco Rubio, history of speaking out about Russian aggression. I guess the question is, in what sense does this help reach some kind of a deal on the ground? And the answer is it doesn't. It just sort of feeds the idea that this is a Russia first, not an America first administration. It stokes Putin's ego. It incentivizes him to play whatever games he wants to play on the battlefield to try and improve his negotiating position. And we've seen an uptick, by the way, of Russian drone attacks on Ukraine. So this doesn't even make sense from a Machiavellian point of view. This doesn't increase their bargaining leverage at the negotiating table. It really is a sorry thing to watch. It's Orwellian, and it diminishes the United States to hear this kind of nonsense, to be frank.
Trump officials refusing to say that Russia was the aggressor in this war. Trump officials refusing to say that Putin is the one who's the dictator, not Zelensky. And Witkoff, actually, in an event just a few days prior, said that in his meetings in Moscow, he was working on developing a, quote, friendship with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, earlier you heard President Trump mention the U.S. proposal for Ukraine to give America sweeping access to its valuable minerals, including titanium and lithium. President Zelensky rejecting the framework of that plan that would see Kyiv hand over half its resource revenues to a U.S.-controlled fund until it reaches $500 billion. Zelensky, meanwhile, said yesterday that he's willing to resign from his post in exchange for peace in Ukraine or NATO membership, if that's what it takes.